Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button as we try to build this thing up. The goal is 1,000 subscribers by the end of the Packers season. Week 1 upon us. Sunday, Packers-Lions at Lambeau Field. Green Bay has won its last 12 home openers. This is the first time in the Matt LaFleur era they will open up their campaign at Lambeau Field. It's the first season opener against Detroit since 2005, the first against Detroit at Lambeau Field since 2001. So it has been a while, not only since Green Bay and Detroit have opened the season against one another, but even longer since it opened the season against one another in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This very well could be the top two teams in the NFC North when it's all said and done in January in the regular season in the division. And so this Week 1 matchup carries a lot of weight. This is our Packers-Lions final thoughts video for Sunday's affair. And a lot of the attention around Green Bay lately is the Micah Parsons trade. And interestingly enough, it'd be easy to say week in and week out, like Micah Parsons will hold the key, and whether or not Green Bay's defense has a lot of success here, at point A, B, C, regardless of the opponent. However, when I did a deep dive into the numbers, and we're going to break down many facets of this matchup, when I broke down the numbers with Jared Goff last year, and Jared Goff, when he has been the Detroit quarterback, while Ben Johnson was also the offensive coordinator, we now know he has since left. He's the head coach of the Chicago Bears. The numbers tell a very fascinating story, and the numbers for Jared Goff leads you down a road where you will believe, just as I do, that in this specific matchup, if Micah Parsons is good to go, and we can't expect him to be out there every snap playing 100% or even 90% of the snaps, Green Bay is going to wean him into things. He's got the back injury going on, and he was just traded to Green Bay. He doesn't have a full grasp on the on Jeff Hafley's system in the playbook yet. But Micah Parsons, as Matt LaFleur said on Wednesday, hopeful that Micah Parsons will be out there Sunday. And when I look at this matchup, Micah Parsons does hold the key for a lot of the successes Green Bay could have, not against Detroit's offense, but against Jared Goff specifically. When you had to face Jared Goff with Ben Johnson at the controls, it was a constant chess match. And typically, you just look at the 15-2 season last year, and Detroit has won back-to-back NFC North titles. It's a chess match where if you're the opponent, you constantly feel like you're playing catch-up. Detroit's offense has been that dynamic, that potent. With Ben Johnson, we'll see what it's like without Ben Johnson. But I tend to lean towards the Lions are going to figure it out. They have way too much talent, way too many pieces on offense. Missing Ben Johnson is huge. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, obviously. I think just as importantly, they're replacing two starters up front on that offensive line. But they still have Jared Goff. They still have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery as a 1-2 punch in the backfield. They still have Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams. Like, there are a wealth of options on this offense. But when you were facing Jared Goff in partnership with Ben Johnson, it was a daunting task for any opponent. However, the numbers for Jared Goff when facing pressure, especially last year, and actually in the last 2 years, are really fascinating when you consider that Micah Parsons could be the perfect solution for Green Bay. Per ESPN, Jared Goff was second in the NFL in QBR when he had a clean pocket last year. So of all the quarterbacks who had a clean pocket last year, Jared Goff had the second best QBR. That number dramatically dipped to 23rd in the NFL when facing pressure. Now, naturally, you're going to say, obviously, a quarterback's going to have better numbers when they have a clean pocket compared to when they're facing pressure and it's right up in their face. The problem for Jared Goff is how significant and how dramatic the dip was. Clean pocket, second in the NFL in QBR. Facing pressure, drops to 23rd. And to just smack some perspective on that, the difference for Jared Goff, second with a clean pocket, 23rd when facing pressure, was the second largest difference in the NFL for a qualifying quarterback, ahead of only Daniel Jones. So when you're talking about a quarterback facing a clean pocket and what their numbers are, and a quarterback when they're facing pressure and what their numbers are, nobody had a more dramatic difference in a negative way than Daniel Jones, and right behind him was Jared Goff. So naturally, when you hear these numbers, your instinct is, okay, obviously you want to get, when you're prepping for any team, not just Jared Goff, as a defense, one of your top priorities is we got to wreak some havoc up front. We have to try to generate pressure on the opposing quarterback. It goes without saying. Jared Goff, in those first batch of numbers I just told you, might lead you to believe, I hope Jeff Hafley's dialing up one blitz after another on Sunday against Goff and a Detroit offensive line that I mentioned is replacing two key cogs. This is where the numbers get really, really fascinating. According to PFF, Jared Goff had a 70.5% completion percentage when facing the blitz in 2024. Again, to better wrap your mind around that, third best in the NFL. So among all qualifying quarterbacks last year, when facing the blitz, Jared Goff had the third highest completion percentage at 70.5. That's nothing to like turn your eye at or scoff at or roll your eyes about. That's a really damn good number. 70.5% completion percentage when facing the blitz in 2024. And on top of that, Goff's PFF grade of 84.9 when being blitzed last year was fifth best in the NFL. Some will say, hey, that probably had a lot to do with Ben Johnson's system, getting the ball out of his hands quickly, dialing up the right calls. Jared Goff plays a key role in it. He is the maestro, the quarterback for Detroit. He still has to make the right decision. He still has to get the ball out of his hands quickly. He still has to decipher his options when the blitz is coming or when the blitz is not coming. And so, sure, Ben Johnson, in his X's and O's style and him being a tactician, certainly helped the offense, helped Jared Goff. But Jared Goff was a big reason as to why Jared Goff was third best in the NFL in completion percentage when facing the blitz and had the fifth best PFF grade among any qualifying quarterback when facing the blitz. He's the one, letting it sling, threading the needle. With Johnson gone, of course, we'll see how it looks for Goff against the blitz in 2025. But that is the dilemma for Jeff Hafley. You need to get pressure on Jared Goff because it reflects clearly, you get pressure on any quarterback, their numbers are going to take a hit. But it showed how dramatic it was for Jared Goff last year. Second in QBR with a clean pocket, 23rd when facing pressure. Nobody had a bigger differential in that category except for Daniel Jones, who's now the starter in Indianapolis, and you can draw your own conclusions about what you think Daniel Jones is or isn't as a starting quarterback. And so if you're Jeff Hafley, it's how often do we want to risk bringing the blitz knowing how good Goff has been against that historically, especially in 2024? How can we manufacture that pressure maybe without bringing the blitz? And that's where I say enter Micah Parsons. Quite literally a one-man wrecking crew. Micah Parsons has 335 quarterback pressures in his career. I'm going to say that phrase again. Let's slap some perspective on it. What does that mean? 335 quarterback pressures in his career. He entered the league in 2021. How do we try to justify what exactly that means? Well, since Micah Parsons entered the league in 2021, that's first in the NFL. Nobody has more quarterback pressures in the National Football League since 2021, which was Micah Parsons' rookie year, than Micah Parsons, who has 335. He also has a pressure rate, which is absurd, of 21.1%. That is Micah Parsons' pressure rate since entering the league, not last year, not in a 6-game sample size, not in the best 3-game stretch of his career. Micah Parsons has a 21.1 pressure rate percentage in his career, and you guessed it, that's tops in the NFL since Micah Parsons entered the league. And so if Detroit wants to send double teams on Parsons, I would say by all means do that. It might work, but to me it'll only free up more advantageous looks for guys like Rashawn Gary, Devontae Wyatt, Lucas Van Ness. How have they done? Well, I look at Rashawn Gary, 4.5 sacks for Rashawn Gary in his last 3 contests against the Detroit Lions. So I look at Micah Parsons and I say, yeah, one player can make that big of a difference. Goff's really good when facing the blitz. Damn near the top in the league in completion percentage, PFF grade. Goff's really good with a clean pocket. Goff is really bad, 23rd among the 32 qualifying NFL quarterbacks last year, starters, 23rd when facing pressure. But if you try manufacturing that pressure via the blitz, he's probably going to burn you. So not many people have that chess piece on the table. Not many have a Micah Parsons, a Myles Garrett, a TJ Watt, a Trey Hendrickson, an Aiden Hutchinson. Welcome back to Aiden Hutchinson. And, I say that as a Packers guy, but I'm terrified. I keep remembering, the Lions beat the Packers twice last year. One was 24-14, but it was pretty convincing fashion at Lambeau Field. The other one was a barn burner, 34-31, came down to the wire. But the Lions beat the Packers twice last year, didn't have Aiden Hutchinson. I'm glad to see him back. I love watching Aiden Hutchinson play, just not against the Packers. but not many teams have that. How can we generate pressure against a quarterback who's not so good when facing, like really bad when facing pressure, but really good if that pressure is trying to be generated through blitzing? Well, the trump card there for Jeff Hafley is Micah Parsons. Just like in Detroit, it's Aiden Hutchinson. Just like in Cleveland, it's Myles Garrett. Just like in Pittsburgh, it's TJ Watt. But there aren't that many, top-tier caliber guys that can be a one-man wrecking crew. Hutchinson can be that in Detroit. Hutchinson is that in Detroit. Micah Parsons can be that for Jeff Hafley and this defense. Blitzing hasn't worked out well for the teams who have rolled out, that blueprint against Detroit's veteran quarterback. That's where Parsons factors in. Last year against the Lions, I got to find this note I had, because it was not good for the Packers' defensive front. Here it is. Last year against the Lions, Green Bay, in 2 games, folks, 2 games against Detroit, Green Bay sacked Goff twice. Not in each game. They sacked him twice total. And the defensive front manufactured just 6 quarterback hits in the 2 games combined. It's not going to get it done. And with Jeff Hafley in 2024, the Packers blitzed 17.3% of the time. I'm throwing a lot of numbers your way, but we're explaining them. It's Packers-Lions final thoughts. It's week 1. We're all fired up. Jeff Hafley had the Packers blitz 17.3% of the time last year. That was 31st in the NFL, ahead of only Jacksonville. And so the Packers blitzed the second fewest amount of any team in the NFL. Now you get Micah Parsons, and you know what Goff's numbers are when facing pressure and how steep of a drop-off it is for him. Micah Parsons, probably not on a full-time basis Sunday. He's going to be on some sort of a pitch count if he's out there for Green Bay. Can still be that one-man wrecking crew for the Packers. It all, like this matchup specifically screams Micah Parsons can be a difference maker against anyone. But in this specific matchup, not against Detroit's offense, but against Jared Goff and what his numbers say, Micah Parsons can have a lot to say about how this matchup takes place. I mentioned a chess match earlier, the chess match between Detroit's offense and Green Bay's defense. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Just click the subscribe button. The goal is 1,000 by the end of the season. We're climbing our way. We've had a couple of big days, big videos in the last, 20 to 30 days. Packers-Lions final thoughts, week 1, Lambeau Field. Packers-Lions haven't opened the season against one another since 2005. Haven't opened the season against one another at Lambeau since 2001. Packers haven't had a season opener week 1 in Green Bay in the Matt LaFleur era. So there's a lot of boxes being checked off for the first time and a couple first time in a long time. Second thing to look at, Green Bay last year was really notorious against the teams that I would call elite on their schedule. Philadelphia, Detroit twice, Minnesota with Sam Darnold last year. Of course, the NFC North came down to the last week, Detroit and Minnesota. And Detroit won that game, 15-2, they get the bye. But against, the elite teams, and you look at Green Bay's losses last year, they had 2 against the Vikings, 2 against Detroit, the one against the Bears week 18, and Philly in week 1. And in the losses specifically against Detroit and Minnesota, Green Bay got off to just really, really sloppy, sluggish starts. And I went back and I looked at some of the numbers. So Green Bay lost 6 games in the regular season last year. And these are like kind of jaw-dropping numbers to think about. So six games I'm factoring in last year, all the losses. Green Bay had a combined 4 touchdowns in the first half of the 6 losses and trailed at the break in 5 of the 6. The only one they led at was in Brazil against Philadelphia in week 1. Slow starts have plagued the Packers, and against Detroit especially. You go back to 2022, the Packers are 1-5 against the Lions, and in those 5 losses, Green Bay has been outscored in the first half. Think about this again. Green Bay, 1-5 against the Lions since 2022. Haven't beaten them at Lambeau since 2021. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to say the quiet part out loud, right? But haven't beaten the Lions at home since 2021. Yeah, this game on Sunday is a big one, right out of the gates. 1-5 against Detroit last few years. In those 5 losses, Green Bay's getting outscored in the first half by Detroit by a score of 75-22. Think about that. In its last 5 losses to Detroit, Green Bay has scored a combined 22 points in the first half, while the Lions have scored 75. You want to talk about something that has to flip over onto the other side if Green Bay wants to turn the fortunes around against the Lions? You got to get off to a quick start. Last year against the Lions, the Packers trailed at halftime 17-3 in the first matchup, 17-7 in the second matchup. Green Bay has to solve that riddle. They have to get off to a quick start. You ask, What are ways they can do that? Well, one, look at third downs. They have to convert on third down. The problem is Detroit was number one last year in the NFL in allowing third downs to be converted. They allowed it at the lowest rate. 32.4% of the time, the opponents were able to move the sticks on Detroit on third down. That was the best mark in the NFL. Detroit, under Aaron Glenn, had the stingiest defense in that department. And you look at Green Bay's numbers against Detroit, they went 3 for 12 on third down in the first matchup, 1 for 5 on third down in the Thanksgiving tilt. Numbers that, again, against the Lions and how good they are, not going to get it done. Second thing you can look at, and again, Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe. Just click the subscribe button. It takes 3 seconds. Doesn't cost you anything. Helps me immensely, though. Goal is 1,000 by the end of the season. Second thing to look at for Green Bay, big chunk plays. And this is one you can really circle on because, like, Green Bay needs to get off to a fast start. You can't just keep digging yourself a big hole against these top-tier teams and expecting to just crawl out of it and make these last-gasp efforts. And it didn't work last year against Detroit or Minnesota. Third downs would be great, but we know how stingy Detroit was last year against that. And I keep telling myself, like, it wasn't just Aiden Hutchinson. Detroit had so many names on injured reserve by the end of the year. It was insane, like how Aaron Glenn was trying to move pieces around to make everything still fit. And I know they got shredded defensively against Washington in the playoff loss, but by and large, that Detroit defense was still stepping up, still delivering with damn near an entire starting lineup on injured reserve. A lot of that came from the defensive side of the ball. Where I think Green Bay can really capitalize in this matchup, based on some of the numbers last year, and there's so many familiar faces back in this matchup for both sides this year, big chunk plays. And you know, I've said it in videos throughout the offseason. Green Bay's passing game felt just like off balance for a lot of last year, and Jordan Love had 3 different injuries. I'm not giving him an excuse, but sprained MCL week 1, and then he misses weeks 2 and 3. A groin injury against Jacksonville, misses the entire second half. An elbow injury against Chicago in week 18, misses the rest of that game. Malik Willis was good, too. Like, I think everyone was like, damn, Malik Willis came in and not only did his role, but he excelled as the starter when Jordan Love was out. But you look at big chunk plays via the passing game for Green Bay. They had 59, the Packers, had 59 completions of 20-plus yards, which was 5th most in the NFL. Love had 12 completions of 40-plus yards a year ago, tied with Joe Burrow for second, trailing only Lamar Jackson. So we think about last year and Jordan Love, it didn't seem like the best product with the passing game. There were a lot of drops. Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, the 2 biggest culprits in that department. Love, you know, the 3 interception, no touchdown game against Philly in the postseason kind of put the cherry on top of what was just seemed like a lackluster passing game. But you listen to Matt LaFleur and Love talk this offseason, and they're like, no, the passing game didn't take a step back. And you wonder how much they're just saying that and trying to maybe convince themselves and convince us, because it did feel off for large parts of the season. But then you look at, you know, big chunk plays, and Jordan Love had 12 completions of 40-plus yards. It's like I don't even remember many of those. It's just like you're trying to, you know, scatter it around in your mind to come up with where those were. And then you see that was tied for second in the NFL with Joe Burrow. And it's like, damn, okay, you can exploit that, right? They had 59 completions of 20-plus yards, 5th most in the NFL. And then you look at Detroit, and you're like, well, was Detroit susceptible to that on the flip side of it? Well, for their offense, Goff had 61 completions of 20-plus yards, which was second in the NFL. Detroit, however, gave up the second most amount of completions of 20-plus yards. So Aaron Glenn and that defense, they did a lot of things right. They had a lot of things in place. They excelled in a lot of areas. One weak point for Detroit's defense, they gave up the second most completions in the NFL of any defense of 20-plus yards, which just so happened to be a major, major strength of Green Bay's offense. 5th most completions of 20-plus yards. Love had tied Burrow 2nd most of 40-plus yards. And you bring back all your wide receivers. Now, Jaden Reed didn't practice on Wednesday. That's when I'm recording this video. We know Christian Watson's going to be on the PUP list, but you have new reinforcements in the form of 1st-round pick Matthew Golden, 3rd-round pick Savion Williams, who you can both, you know, you're talking pros and cons of Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. The pros for both of them is there is home run capability. They can get you big chunk plays in the passing game, especially Golden. And Savion Williams can be that gadget player. Will he be that right out of the gates in week 1 after missing a lot of the preseason and a lot of training camp? I don't know, but Matthew Golden's ready to go. And so you hope to have Jaden Reed out there. We know Christian Watson's going to be out, and those are 2 guys who can take the lid off the back end of a defense, right? But you look at one spot in this game where it's like, where can Green Bay capitalize? And to me, big chunk plays. Detroit, again, gave up the second most completions of 20-plus yards, and that funnels right into some things that Green Bay did really well last year in the passing game for, again, what was otherwise kind of just a roller coaster ride of a season for Jordan Love and the rest of the passing game. So those are two things. Get off to a fast start. Try to do better on third down against Detroit. If Sunday rolls around and it's 17-3 or 17-7 at halftime, you're going to be thinking like, has anything changed? Like, you got Micah Parsons, that's awesome, but has anything changed? And Detroit's still, kicking the crap out of us. 1-5 in the last 6. I haven't beat them at Lambeau since 2021. And then those big chunk plays. Again, it's another thing where it's like, you can say that's always a key to rip off 20-plus yard completions. Well, it's something Green Bay did well at last year offensively. It's not like I'm saying, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's not like I'm saying, hey, like Spencer Rattler and the Saints, if they can rip off a bunch of 20-plus yard, well, yeah, every team would like their chances if they can consistently find means of success through big chunk plays in the passing game. But it's just with the numbers for Green Bay, it was something they actually accomplished last year, and it lines up with something that Detroit's defense struggled with last year. Final thoughts. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Getting ready for Packers-Lions on Sunday, Lambeau Field. Mentally, this game is, I'm not overhyping it. I'm not. This game is heavy for Green Bay, and that's why I wanted to preface by saying I'm not overhyping it. Like, this is real. Mentally, this is a heavy game for Green Bay and their mentals, what's going on up here. Because if you're the Packers and you win this game, you're rocking and rolling. You beat Detroit at home for the first time in 4 years. You start the year 1-0, and you start in the division 1-0 after going 1-5 in the NFC North last year. Now, I should have researched this. Don't remember the last time the Packers went 1-5 in the division or were that poor in the NFC North. And remember, if not for the left mitt? If not for the left mitt of Carl Brooks blocking a field goal as time expires in Chicago last year, you're 0-6 in the division. Now, you can flip that around and say, well, the Bears made a field goal as time expired against Green Bay's backups in Week 18. Otherwise, Green Bay would have swept the Bears again. And I get all that, but I can also point out, if not for Carl Brooks' mitt, Green Bay would have been 0-6 in the NFC North, yet still, despite going 1-5 in the division, made the playoffs. And even more bizarre, I got to look this up. Green Bay went, I remember looking this up, Green Bay went 11-6 last year, and it was only good for third in the NFC North. That's how loaded it was in the division with Detroit and Minnesota up top. I'm pretty sure that record would have been good enough to win 2 divisions last year for Green Bay. Let me look here. Green Bay goes 11-6. Green Bay goes 11-6 last year. Tampa Bay won the South at 10-7. The Rams won the West at 10-7. The Texans won the AFC South at 10-7. So Green Bay finished third in its own division. Typically, if you finish third in your own division, not a great year. But they went 11-6. That would have won outright 3 other divisions, the AFC South, the NFC South, and the NFC West. Like, that just shows how loaded the NFC North was. But it doesn't negate the fact that Green Bay, like I said, went 1-5 in the division. That is not the standard. That is not the norm in Green Bay. And there might be Lions fans watching this, and you're like, Green Bay fans have been spoiled long enough. That's completely fair to say. I get it. I try not to take any of it for granted. But 1-5 in the division is definitely not up to par for what Green Bay, they say every year, they've said it this year. The goal we always start with is winning the division. Win the NFC North. You host at least one playoff game. You check one box, it opens up another door. You win that division, you're automatically guaranteed one home game. And so Green Bay's trying to take that back after Detroit has been at the top of the pecking order the last 2 years. And so after a 1-5 division record last year that left a really, really sour taste in your mouth, to start out 1-0 in overall, but more importantly in the division, and to have that one win be against the Lions, who, again, they've got the target on their back. They might spin it around and say, hey, after the Micah Parsons trade, look at FanDuel, look at DraftKings. Green Bay's the favorite to win the NFC North. Slight favorite over Detroit, but a favorite nonetheless. And Dan Campbell, who I love Dan Campbell, master motivator as a head coach. You don't think he's telling his team, hey, we've won the division 2 years in a row. Green Bay's the favorites right now. What do you guys think about that? Try to get his team revved up even more for this matchup on Sunday. Like I said, though, mentally for Green Bay, this one means a hell of a lot. You could start 1-0, and then you carry that juju and that momentum into a quick turnaround, because remember, Green Bay plays Detroit on Sunday, 15-2 last year, top seed in the NFC, and then Green Bay has an incredibly quick turnaround for week 2, where they play Thursday night football against Washington, who, oh, by the way, with rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels last year, made the NFC Championship. Beat Detroit in Detroit, who was coming off a bye in the playoffs. Who'd they beat in the first round? Was it Tampa? I think Washington beat Tampa, and then they beat Detroit, and then lost to Philly, the eventual Super Bowl champs. It's a daunting start for Green Bay. Detroit, Washington. Now, you get both of them at home, but Detroit and then quick turnaround. If you lose to Detroit, let's play this out. If you lose to the Lions on Sunday, you're stuck wondering if it's the same old song in 2025. You'll try to rationalize, and I'm trying to speak to Packer fans here. You will try to rationalize by saying it's just one game. You know, the Packers get off to these slow starts sometimes. They'll be fine. They can still win the division. 5 games left in the NFC North, 16 left in the regular season. It sucks losing to the Lions. Still haven't beaten them at home since 2021. But you're going to try to rationalize, right? And say, hey, there's still a lot out in front of them. It's just week 1. I am telling you, internally, those thoughts are going to start creeping in your mind. Those thoughts are going to start creeping in the coaching staff's mind. Those thoughts are going to start creeping in the players' minds. You lose to Detroit week 1, and you're going to start thinking, here we go again. Good team, not good enough to beat the elite. And that was a huge narrative, a dark cloud hanging over the head of the Green Bay Packers in 2024. Really good against, punching down at some lesser opponents. When it comes to playing the best of the best, lost to Philadelphia twice, once in the regular season, once in the postseason. Lost to Detroit twice, lost to Minnesota twice. What was Green Bay's best win a year ago? Let me pull up the schedule. Was it Houston? And Houston went to the playoffs, but they were, I believe, they one and done, or did Stroud figure it out? I think they beat the Chargers. Packers wins last year. Colts, nope. Tennessee, nope. Rams made the playoffs. So you beat the Rams. Cardinals, no. Texans, all right. Jags, no. Bears, no. Niners, last year, no. Dolphins, no. Seahawks, no. Saints, no. Like, your best win, Rams are good. Houston's good. But were they in the same tier as Detroit? No. Philadelphia? No. And Green Bay went a combined 0-4 against those teams. So you lose week 1 to Detroit, I'm telling you, those thoughts are going to start creeping in everyone's mind. Here we go again. Is Green Bay just going to be pretty good enough to make the playoffs, but can't put that dent in Detroit, can't put that dent into Philadelphia? Who knows if San Francisco rebounds this year? Who knows if LA takes off? They've added more pieces around Matthew Stafford in the form of veteran wide receiver Devontae Adams. I'm telling you, you lose, and those thoughts start creeping into everyone's mind. And then you have to remind yourself, oh, shoot, we got to turn this thing around. If you're a Packers player, we got to all of a sudden get ready for Washington on a quick turnaround on a Thursday night. And I'm telling you, that mental aspect of this weighs heavy. You lose to Detroit, who are replacing Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, and you do so in week 1 when some of this for Detroit, like, Detroit's going to go in with an abundant amount of confidence. That's the Dan Campbell way, as they should. Back-to-back NFC North champs. Going up against the Packers in Green Bay, they've made the most of it the last few years, those last few trips. Amon-Ra St. Brown was so confident he wore a Green Bay sucks hoodie coming off the team bus into Lambeau last year. But Green Bay is getting Detroit at a time where they're still ushering in a new OC. They're still ushering in a new DC. And you can talk about, hey, we feel comfortable after preseason and training camp with where things are, but it is still going to be somewhat of a feel-out process for the Lions. That offense might be similar in terms of, what they're calling, when they're calling it, situational stuff. It's not going to be congruent to what Ben Johnson did. That defense might be similar and might look similar schematically to what Aaron Glenn did, but it is not going to be identical to what Aaron Glenn did. It's just not. It's impossible to expect that. Detroit fans know that. Should still be really good. But early on, this is going to be a feel-out process. And so if you're Green Bay, you're thinking, we're getting them at a time where they don't really know exactly how it's going to look on offense and defense with new signal callers on both sides with new coordinators. That is a big deal. And so Green Bay should be circling this as this is a good time to pounce on the Lions and get them in week 1 in our home. But if you lose when they're going through this change and starting off a new regime at offensive coordinator and defense coordinator in your house in week 1 after going 1-5 in the division, you're going to be thinking it's the same old song with Green Bay again. So if you're the Packers, go get that win. It should be a hell of a matchup. And then you roll that momentum into a quick turnaround in a week 2 matchup on Thursday Night Football against the Washington Commanders. First season opener against Detroit since 2005. First against Detroit and Green Bay since 2001. The 2 top teams according to the odds makers in the NFC North, and there is not much difference in those odds between Green Bay and Detroit. Let me know what you guys and gals think. Always appreciative of all the support. Please click the subscribe button. It is Mitch Heim on YouTube. As I said, always appreciate the support as we build this thing up. I'm going to say it again. The goal is 1,000 subscribers by the end of the Packers season. Week 1 is upon us. We'll see you next time.